Hi, my name is Cheryl Brehme, and my presentation is on the effectiveness of turnarounds in changing the trajectory of reptiles, amphibians, and small mammals. So this study was part of a 5-year project that the USGS conducted in collaboration with the Western Transportation Institute. And there are 2 documents from this work that are posted on the Caltrans website. And the documents are a USGS research report and a guidance manual for reptile and amphibian passage and barrier systems produced by Western Transportation Institute. And links are also available on our website below. So we primarily did research to inform this guidance manual, and our contributions were: 1, a California amphibian and reptile road risk assessment with 166 species in California. That was published in 2018. A spatial geodatabase tool that crosswalks high-risk species in California highways. And then a number of field studies to address information gaps. These included looking at give-up distances along fencing for migratory species, effects of fence opacity on movement, effects of or effectiveness of jump outs and escape ramps, evaluation of a new crossing structure, and then what I'm talking about today, the effectiveness of turnarounds. So there were a lot of people involved in this research, and in particular, I'd like to call out to Jenny Kingston, Tristan Edgarian, and Jeremy Seavies, who conducted much of the field work and video review for this project. And we also want to thank Caltrans for funding and supporting this research. So it's a common practice to install turnarounds at fence ends. And turnarounds are often a U shape designed to redirect animals away from the road at the end of the fences. But although they're recommended in many countries and in guidance documents, to our knowledge, there are little data that have actually addressed the relative effectiveness of these structures. So our research questions were: are turnarounds effective in changing the trajectory of the movement of small vertebrates? Does fence opacity alter turnaround effectiveness? And how much time is spent within the turnarounds? And does fence opacity affect the time spent within them? So we conducted our study at an ecological reserve in Jamul, California. We installed 3 28-meter segments of fencing along dirt roads with turnarounds on each side of the fencing for a total of 6 turnarounds. The middle fence segment was solid fencing, while 2 turnarounds each were made from either solid, semi-transparent polymer mesh or transparent hardware cloth that were randomly chosen among those fences. So each turnaround was approximately 1.5 meters long and 1 meter wide. The posts in the photos are to deter cattle. At the opening of each turnaround, we installed a halt active infrared trigger and camera system. And these cameras were placed about 2.5 meters or 7 feet from the end of the turnaround with a frame of view that allowed us to follow the movement of animals for approximately 1 meter after they exited the turnaround in any direction. There you can see the halt trigger at the entrance and exit of the turnaround and the placement of the camera. And here are some photos from different frames of view. On the left is looking from inside to outside of the turnaround. You can see a halt camera active trigger spanning the turnaround exit. Once an animal moves over the active infrared trigger, the camera starts recording video. And on the right is looking from outside to where the turnaround, where the camera is facing. And the orange lines in both pictures show the camera and the ends of the turnarounds. For our study, we recorded video for 25 to 40 seconds. We checked and reset the videos at each turnaround on a weekly basis. And then on reviewing the video, we recorded species, direction of travel, and time within the turnaround. So if an animal entered and exited multiple times in succession, we only recorded the final trajectory. And animal movements were only counted if they fully exited the frame of the camera. For analysis, we present mean and standard deviation of the proportions of animal movements by taxonomic group and across 3 movement categories as shown in the right figure. Continued is when the animal moves in the same direction as they're originally traveling, meaning that the turnaround was not effective. Out into the habitat or back along the fence line are both, we both considered effective at changing the direction of their movement. Here's an example of a cottontail rabbit continuing in the original direction after exiting a turnaround. And here's an example of a western rattlesnake moving out into the habitat after exiting a turnaround. Takes a little while. And here's an example of western toad moving back along the fence line after exiting a turnaround. So here were the results. We documented 264 lizards. They were primarily orange-throated whiptails, western side-blotched lizards, and western fence lizards. And the graph to the right shows the proportion of lizards that continued in the same direction in green, went out into the habitat in orange, and then went back along the fence line in red. So only 8% of the lizards continued in the same direction, while 27% went out into the habitat and 65% moved back along the fence line. So the turnarounds changed the trajectory of 92% of lizards in our study. We also documented 96 snakes, primarily 3 species of racers, gopher snakes and rattlesnakes, and only 2% of the snakes continued in the same direction, while 32% went out into the habitat and 66% moved back along the fence line. So the turnarounds changed the trajectory of 98% of the snakes in our study. We documented 59 anurans, primarily the western toad. 19 were not identified as species, but were likely juvenile toads. We're currently reviewing those right now. Only 3% of the anurans continued in the same direction, while 14% went out into the habitat and 83% moved back along the fence line. So turnarounds changed the trajectory of 97% of the anurans in our study. And finally, for small mammals, we documented 370 individuals, primarily deer mice, cottontail rabbits, kangaroo rats, and pocket mice. And there were a lot more variability among species than the reptiles and amphibians, and no significant differences in movement trajectories among the 3 categories. However, the turnarounds changed the trajectory of about 70% of the small mammals in our study. And overall, mice were more likely to change their direction than rats or rabbits. And here we show the results by taxonomic group, which are the rows, and by fence type, which are the columns, from left to right, with solid semi-transparent mesh in the middle, and then the transparent hardware cloth on the right. Also showing the proportion of each type of movement. And while fence transparency really didn't appear to affect the movement direction of lizards, snakes, or toads, hardware cloth, it looks like hardware cloth may have been more effective in changing the movement direction of small mammals. So if you look at the bottom right graph, you can see a low proportion that continued and a higher proportion that turned around with the hardware cloth fence. So validation of these findings in other locations and possibly more specific research studies addressing spatial learning in their natural environments would really be needed to further our understanding of these results. Finally, animals spent an average of 1 to 13 minutes in a turnaround. Toads spent the most time in turnarounds, while mammals spent the least time. And there was a general trend among taxa of spending more time in a turnaround they could see and smell through. And this may be related to more time spent poking, climbing, and back and forth movements that we've also documented with transparent fencing and other studies. So our study only looked at short distance responses of animals to turnarounds, but how they respond for longer distances or time periods is unknown. We do have a small amount of longer distance data from concurrent studies on fence movement distances of both the California tiger salamanders in Stanford, California, and Yosemite toads in Sierra National Forest, California. Between 2017 and 2019, we only recorded 3 California tiger salamanders that encountered a turnaround. And of these, 1 went out into the habitat, 1 traveled back 25 meters along the fence, and 1 traveled 125 meters back along the fence to an underpass. And for Yosemite toads, 7 out of 10 changed course, and of these, 3 went out into the habitat and 4 were documented 40 to 80 meters back along the fence line. So in conclusion, turnarounds were effective in changing the initial trajectory of reptiles, amphibians, and small mammals. They were most effective for reptiles and amphibians and less effective for small mammals. Fence opacity did not affect the movement directions for reptiles and amphibians out of the turnarounds. Hardware cloth did appear to be more effective for small mammals, but that needs to be validated as we discussed. And all taxons spent more time in more transparent turnarounds. So, and there is some evidence that animals continue to move in the same direction for longer distances and time scales, but we really need, that's really where studies are needed to see how the turnarounds work in the longer term and over larger distances, and also looking at species-specific responses. And just as a closure, USGS and Caltrans are currently studying whether multiple turnarounds along fencing will lead animals to passages more efficiently. Finally, I'll end with a campy video we have on our website of a successful turnaround outcome of a California salamander in Stanford, California. Thank you.